I think that's a good segue into how to sprinkle in your specialization or what makes you unique with your niche during app critiques. And if there's anything, advice that you can bring into that, maybe even anything you'd like to share with regards to that.
So I think a lot of people have a misconception about what app critiques are for and why it's even a step in the interview process. Um, Broadly speaking, an app critique is not something you can or should prepare for. In fact, like most interviewers are trained to actually change the app critique prompt if it seems like you've prepared like a response to a certain app. Generally, they ask you or they look for an app that both of you guys have on your phone, and then they ask you to kind of critique and walk through your thinking for a particular user flow or feature. And generally, like the reason why we do this is one, to see how well you can think on the fly when you aren't able to prepare ahead of time. And two, to see like as a designer, what is your unique kind of approach to design? Like what kind of things do you value? What kind of things do you emphasize? For example, like, you know, we don't like, we can sort of tell how good you are with like visual interaction, product thinking, and maybe a handful of other skills through your portfolio, but we don't know how hard or how much work it was for you to like create that, right? Through an app critique, like if we see that you comment a lot on the branding and the iconography, then we know that, okay, like you are more of a visual designer, or you're more, you have like more of that marketing and branding kind of perspective. If you critique a lot on the information architecture, the layout, the micro interactions, and we know you're more focused on interaction. If you talk about the product strategy, the metrics, the user goals, the business prompts, the monetization strategy, then we know that you're more geared towards product thinking. And then if you bring up things like, you know, sound design, animation, the content and the copywriting itself, then we know you have those additional skill sets. So you know, those are basically what we use to determine like what your niche is. It's like another signal for us. And it tells us like, you know, what team to place you on. Because certain teams will need a very strong interaction designer, certain teams will need a very strong visual designer. And sometimes it's like not super obvious or clear from just the portfolio itself. Um, so does that make sense at a high level what app critiques are? I can go into more detail about how to actually do one.
Like to go in deep detail. I'm sure everyone would love to hear that.
Well, I don't know if we can do like almost a simulation right now. Do you have an iPhone?
I have an Android. I know, right? But anyway,
I
iPhone coming soon.
All right, I also have an Android, but I don't really use this. What are some of the most common apps that you use?
Instagram, I say Snapchat when I don't want to throw up from the UI, but and also let's go Gmail. I think those are
Gmail's
some
good.
three.
Um,
Yeah.
so one thing that we do is we want to avoid the apps that are too common. So
Hmm.
Facebook, Spotify, Yelp, um, Facebook, Spotify, Yelp are the common ones that everyone just for some reason has like a prepared answer for. We usually go for one that is less common. So
Hmm.
Gmail works. So how it works is, you know, we both open up Gmail. So if you go to your phone and open it, we can talk about, you know, like some high level stuff. So we probe into, you know, what is your experience using Gmail? Like, what do you think the goals are? What metrics do you think they're optimizing for? What do you like about Gmail and what do you not like? So
Hmm.
I don't know if you want to like do this interactive exercise with me, but I can give you feedback on your answers.
Yeah, let's do it. Totally unprompted or anything. Yeah. So specifically, Gmail's purpose is to kind of be the application for your Gmail account for sending out emails. So it's making sure the user's goals of composing an email and actually as seamless as possible. So if I were to click here on the bottom right for compose, I'm able to redirect completely to composing an email.
Mhm.
Click there, answering who I want. So if I just type in H, usually hello, I get a prompt for a bunch of emails already in my address book. So I'm going to email customer service hello at blank.com.
Just to
So
give you, yeah, just to take a step back. I think it was good. I think you jumped a bit too quickly into the details. So usually
Mm,
spend a couple minutes talking high level and then talk about which areas you want to analyze and maybe let the interviewer guide you. So
mm.
maybe I asked too many questions up front, but who do you think Gmail is for?
Gmail is definitely for any. Let's see. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat as well if anyone else wants to answer it. I just saw it pop up, but Gmail's for any user that wants to send out an email.
Okay, so what do you think differentiates Gmail's users from users of Outlook, for example?
The G Suite. So really the whole digital ecosystem of Gmail, adding it to your
Uh,
calendar,
You can
Drive, etc.
also talk about how like Outlook is typically more for enterprise users, and
Mm,
Gmail is more for consumers and startups. You can maybe
mm,
talk about like why that is, the difference between enterprise and consumer products. Like that would highlight or give me a signal that you have product strategy as like a perspective or a skill set. Um,
mm,
so common questions like, how do you think Gmail stacks up against its competitors? That's one example of a question. So you can talk about, the pros and cons, how they're positioned in the market. So for
mm,
example, you can talk about how Outlook is more for enterprise. So they're more about like security and stuff. And there's a lot of features with like, storage, saving, etc. Whereas like Gmail is really optimized for the consumer. So they have a
mm,
lot of quality of life features like auto sorted tags, auto filtering into promotions, undos, a lot of like really interesting like quality of life settings. So that kind of tells me like market positioning as a skill set. Afterwards, I might, this is just more of a conversation starter, but like, what do you like
mm.
about Gmail?
Oh, is that a rhetorical question, or you want to actually dive
No,
in?
you can tell me. Yeah, what do you like
Yeah,
about
sure.
Gmail?
I like the fact that with Gmail, it really does follow a simple design for so usability heuristics are just kind of quickly just listing it. So I know it follows a lot of the Z pattern. So if I need to compose an email, I know that's at the bottom right, where
Mhm.
it's like less likely to look at. Um, I like the fact that with Gmail, like you said, it's very consumer facing. So it really fixes into my needs as individual consumer, not as an enterprise. And it's once again, if there's any additional
Mhm.
items for integrating with the G Suite,
Mhm.
Gmail is able to make that almost a seamless process. But we can go into detail more. I just want to keep an eye on time.
Cool. Yeah, and then usually I'll also ask like, what do you think Gmail can improve on? And then that's the big question I use to check for, what you focus on as a designer. If you talk about the branding, the colors, the typography, then I know like, those are the things that you would pay attention to as a designer. And then
Mm-hmm.
subconsciously, I'll try and match you onto teams that would value and utilize that skill set well. Um, and then when I asked you like what features do you like, that's telling me signals on like what areas you can deep dive on.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we don't need to go into too much detail because we're running out of time, but I might ask you to go through like an obscure flow like settings or what do you want to do when you have to organize your inbox? Walk me through that experience. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's no right answer for this. Like the only wrong answer is if you focus like too deeply into like a random thing and don't talk broadly enough, because then you're
Mm-hmm.
not demonstrating a wide enough skill set. And if you're giving opinions more than like here are the principles and the references of what's good design, what's bad design, um,
Mm-hmm.
which I can tell could be misleading because they usually ask you like, what do you like about it? But you should interpret that question as like, from a design perspective, what is Gmail's strengths when it comes to solving their user segments problems? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I liked how you mentioned like that Z-shaped reading pattern. That's a signal that, that's a design principle that you pay attention to. Gives me some signal that you have visual design as like as a skill set. So that's generally how an app critique works.
You mentioned earlier specifically the top-down method of thinking a product level, interaction level, and a visual level.
Mhm.
Is that a recommendation structure that one could apply, whether it's app critique and whiteboard challenge, or is there a certain line of thinking that you may have?
Again, there's no hard and fast rule on process, but generally, and take this with a grain of salt, that's my approach. I always start from a macro level and then work my way to the more granular details. Like I try and do the big rocks first before pouring in the sand per se. So like there's no point trying to iterate on like a specific layout or visual design style if you don't even know what screens you need, what features you're trying to build, and what order they're supposed to be in. So generally, yeah, like you save a lot of time if you go from macro to micro. And for me, that means like product thinking first, then interaction, and then visual. And then depending on your project, your scope, and your constraints, you might approach this a little bit differently or do them in parallel. It always depends. That's why I always advocate for the fact that you should always like expand your UX toolbox of different processes, frameworks, and tools and software, and get really good at identifying the pros and cons of each of those, so you can create a optimal kind of project plan for each new product you work on. In all my years of designing, I've literally never used the same process twice.